David Gray here to talk to you about designing the infrastructure for your video surveillance systems. When designing your system, there's two main parameters you really want to consider. That is the throughput and the storage amount. There's certainly other things to consider, but if you address those two parameters, then you've gone a long way in designing your system. When considering throughput, there are three kinds that are relevant for video surveillance. There's recording throughput, there's redirection throughput, and there's playback throughput. Recording throughput is the total amount of video that you're actually storing on the disks. So this is everything that comes in from the camera that's going to get written to the disk at any given time. Typical systems aren't designed to have the cameras running all the time, all day, which means that there will be variations in how much data is actually getting recorded and written to the disk. Those variations could come from things like, a camera set to motion, and then during the day there's more motion in a building, so more data gets recorded. And when designing your infrastructure, you need to consider what the maximum throughput will be, and that maximum throughput is the number that you need to use when speccing your system. Second type of throughput to consider for your system is playback throughput. And that's where archived video footage is pulled up and then viewed on a client workstation. Typically, some stations are mostly used for live monitoring, and in that case, there's not a lot of playback throughput. So the playback throughput would typically be lower, something around 5%. But in systems where there's a lot more playback, because there's more investigations or something else that requires video to be pulled up more often, that's where you could see playback throughput in the range of 20%. So when you're looking at the overall system design, you need to balance, your recording throughput and then add consideration into playback throughput. Sometimes if there's a really high playback throughput, you'll need a lot more in playback throughput on your system, and it might not balance perfectly with how much you need for the archiver. The third and final kind of throughput is redirection throughput. And this is only relevant in a system that is not using multicast. So this is a unicast thing, and it's where there's throughput coming from the camera to the archiver, and then it's directly fed back into a client workstation. So it's for live monitoring, but it's for live monitoring in systems where multicast isn't set up and sending the video feed directly from the camera to the client workstation, bypassing the archiver altogether. On the other side of the infrastructure equation is the storage. When you buy a system, you look at the usable storage or what you care about is the usable storage of a system, but when you buy it, you get raw storage. Raw storage is the total amount of storage that you get in your hard drives, but not all of that can be used to store your video recordings. Let's give you an example. If you have 12 10 terabyte drives, you'll have 120 terabytes of raw storage. Now, if you want to put that in RAID 6, you're going to lose 2 drives to parity, which means you'll actually have 100 terabytes of usable capacity. And that usable capacity is what you're going to use to store your actual video footage. So now that you've got those two main parameters out of the way, you've got the core of the information you need for designing your infrastructure needs, but it's certainly not everything you need to take into consideration. There's a lot of other design aspects to consider, and luckily there's an appliance crash course coming up this fall where we'll dive into both throughput and storage at a deeper level, and we'll also cover the rest of those parameters.